What if you had the power to save a dying world, but in doing so, you risk destroying everything you held dear? A young man, caught in a deadly twist of fate, finds himself standing at the crossroads between hope and utter destruction. With the fate of an entire village in his hands and a mystical device that could either save or shatter the world, he must make a choice that no one could ever prepare for. But as the earth trembles beneath him and the unthinkable happens, one question remains: can he truly save them, or has he already doomed them all? Stay with me until the end of this journey, and if you're moved by what you see, don't forget to subscribe, because this story doesn't end here. There's so much more coming your way, and you won't want to miss it. Create a visually captivating fantasy scene with a young man and woman standing in a rustic village setting, surrounded by lush greenery. The man, dressed in a traditional, rugged outfit, holds an ancient, glowing chest with magical, sparkling rings inside. The woman, wearing a similar outfit, gazes at the chest with intrigue. In the background, a chicken in a cage and other chickens roam freely near the village house. The image should be vibrant and filled with magical elements that enhance the fantasy feel, like glowing lights and mystical symbols hovering around the chest. The overall atmosphere should feel like a mix of adventure and mystery, designed to attract viewers' attention immediately. This type of prompt should help generate an image that fits your description while focusing on fantasy elements that will draw attention. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. As the young man stepped through the portal, the world around him shifted. The landscape was barren, with crops long dead and the sky a dull, oppressive gray. He stumbled into a village, its huts half collapsed, smoke barely rising from the remains of a fire. The people here were gaunt, their faces hollow with hunger. They looked at him, eyes wide, yet no one spoke. A silence stretched, thick and heavy. He felt his pulse quicken. The weight of their suffering pressed down on him, each breath a reminder of how desperate their situation was. The village was trapped in time, a place where survival seemed impossible. And yet, he had something they didn't. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, glowing device. It hummed softly in his hand, a faint light pulsing from its core. This was no ordinary item. It was a magical supply system, something he had never fully understood but knew would help him save them. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the device. The faint light intensified. He whispered the words he had learned during his travels. In an instant, the air seemed to shimmer around him. A small crate appeared before him, its wooden surface gleaming under the gray sky. The villagers watched, wide-eyed, as the crate opened to reveal sacks of grain, jars of water, and bundles of herbs. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then, one of the villagers stepped forward, hands shaking. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of a sack of grain. Her eyes flickered between the chest and the young man. "Where did this come from?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately, watching the other villagers begin to gather around. They looked at the supplies, disbelief in their eyes. The young man could feel their hope begin to rise, but there was something else, a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't the world he had known. The hunger here felt real. And for all the magic in the world, it might not be enough to save them all. As the villagers started to take the supplies, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The device glowed brighter, almost as though it was alive. The air grew thick with tension, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. A low rumble echoed from the horizon. The villagers stopped in their tracks, their faces turning pale. The young man's eyes darted to the sky. He had no idea what was coming. But he knew one thing for sure. The calm they felt, the brief hope, it wouldn't last long. The earth shook again, this time harder. The crates of supplies rattled, and the light from the device flickered. The villagers screamed, scattering in all directions. The young man's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to steady himself, but the world around him was crumbling. It wasn't just hunger that threatened them anymore. Something far worse was coming. The question was, would the magical system be enough to save them from what lurked on the horizon? The young man's breath caught in his throat as the ground trembled once again, more violently this time. Dust rose in the air, swirling around him like a storm. The villagers screamed, their panic rising with each tremor. He could hear the frantic steps of people running, shouting, but the noise of the earth's fury drowned it all out. His heart hammered in his chest as the light from the magical device flickered and dimmed. The young man's hands shook as he clutched it tighter, his thoughts racing. Could this be the end? Could this be the price for trying to change a timeline so broken? Behind him, the ground cracked open, a deep rift splitting the earth in two. The noise was deafening, like the world itself was being torn apart. He felt a cold chill wash over him, seeping into his bones. His mind raced. There had to be something he could do. But as he looked at the frightened villagers, faces pale, eyes wide with terror, he realized how fragile hope truly was. All of a sudden, the faintest glimmer of hope seemed to fade. The young man knew this wasn't just some natural disaster.
No.
It was something more. A creeping dread settled in his gut as the shaking finally stopped, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. It was then that he saw it. From the darkened horizon, something moved, a shape, dark and massive, coming closer, moving through the haze of dust. At first, it was a blur, but then, with a sudden, bone-chilling clarity, it became visible. A massive creature, its body covered in scales that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural, ghostly glow. Its eyes burned like molten fire, and its wings, huge, leathery, and stretched wide, created gusts of wind that threw the villagers off their feet. The young man's heart skipped a beat. It was a dragon, but not just any dragon. This creature was ancient, twisted by some dark magic. Its presence felt like the very air around him was suffocating, and every breath was harder than the last. The villagers froze, their faces drained of all color. Some knelt, others stood frozen in place, staring at the monstrous creature with wide, disbelieving eyes. The young man's mind was a blur of panic and disbelief. He had read about creatures like this in the scrolls, heard the legends, but he never truly believed them. Now, standing before him was a nightmare brought to life. It landed with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave of air that knocked the young man to his knees. The ground cracked beneath him, and the villagers cried out in fear, their voices breaking the unnatural stillness. He staggered to his feet, his heart racing as he tried to focus. The magical supply system was still in his hands, glowing faintly. The device hummed, as if it recognized the danger approaching, but it did nothing to stop the creature. It was just a tool, just an object. The young man clenched his fists. Was that all he had? Was that all he could do? He didn't know what kind of power the dragon possessed, but the fear in the villagers' eyes told him it was far beyond anything they could survive. The creature turned its gaze toward the young man, its fiery eyes locking with his. He felt a wave of cold, almost suffocating fear sweep through him. But then something unexpected happened. The dragon didn't attack immediately. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling growl. It seemed to study him, as though waiting for something. The young man's mind raced, but he could feel something stirring within him. A sense of responsibility, a weight heavier than any fear he had ever felt. He knew he couldn't let these people die. They had already suffered so much. The young man's thoughts turned to the magical device in his hand. Could it stop the dragon? Could it protect the villagers? He looked at the faces of the villagers, their eyes full of fear and despair. They had already lost so much. They were counting on him. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he felt as though his very soul was being torn apart. But then, just as the dragon let out a roar so loud it shook the very sky, the young man made a decision. With trembling hands, he pressed a sequence of buttons on the device. The light from the chest flared brightly, almost blinding him. And then nothing. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The young man's heart pounded, and he felt a surge of terror. Had he failed? But then, the ground began to rumble again. Not from the dragon, but from below. The earth shook as if it was reacting to the power the young man had just unleashed. A series of glowing symbols appeared in the air around the chest. It was working. A wave of energy shot out from the device, creating a barrier of light that surrounded the villagers, forming a protective shield between them and the dragon. The dragon howled in fury as it charged forward, but the energy field held firm. It slammed into the barrier, and the force of the impact sent a shockwave through the village, shaking the very ground. The young man staggered, struggling to keep his balance. The barrier was holding, but it wouldn't last long. The device began to glow brighter, its power draining faster than he could control. He had no idea how much time they had before the energy ran out. His eyes locked with the dragon's, and in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for hope. The young man knew that he couldn't rely on the device alone. He had to do more. He had to fight back, even if it meant risking everything. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes and whispered a single word, a command he had learned from the scrolls. In response, the magical system hummed louder, and the barrier around the village began to grow stronger. But would it be enough? The young man knew the answer.
It was up to him now.
As the dragon roared again, the young man took one final step forward, his heart resolute. He was ready to fight. For the village. For their future. For hope. The young man's chest tightened as he took that step forward. Every fiber of his being screamed in warning, but he pushed it down. He had no choice. He couldn't let the villagers see him falter now, not when they were so close to salvation. The glowing barrier hummed with energy, but it felt fragile, like glass about to shatter under the weight of 1,000 hammers. He could feel the heat from the dragon's fiery breath, even though the barrier protected them. The intense, suffocating warmth made it hard to breathe, as if the air itself had been replaced by the dragon's fiery rage. The dragon's eyes glowed with an unholy fire, its snarl louder than any storm, a noise that shook him to his very core. Its massive wings flapped again, sending gusts of wind that threw dirt and debris into the air. He shielded his face, but his heart pounded relentlessly. Time felt distorted in the grip of the creature's rage. It was like he was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the only thing holding him up was sheer willpower. The villagers huddled together behind the barrier, fear and confusion written on their faces. The young man could see the terror in their eyes. He had brought them hope, but now he felt like he was watching it slip away, just out of his reach. The dragon let out another earth-shattering roar, its powerful jaws snapping shut. The air seemed to crack with the force of it, and the young man's knees almost buckled beneath him. But he stood firm, refusing to break. He turned back to the glowing device in his hand. It was still humming with power, but the light was fading fast. His eyes scanned over the symbols etched into the air, each one flickering in and out of existence. They were disappearing as quickly as the light. His pulse quickened. He had to act, and fast. The dragon lunged forward, its massive body twisting in the air, jaws wide to tear through the barrier. He could see the raw power in its movements. This creature was ancient, its strength immeasurable. The young man swallowed the lump in his throat. This was it. His fingers shook as he tightened his grip on the device, and for the first time, he truly understood the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. It was more than just survival. It was more than just a battle against a dragon. It was a battle for the souls of these people, for their hope. They had nothing left, and if he failed, if he couldn't protect them, then their last chance would be lost forever. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. His mind raced, but he knew there was no more time for hesitation. He had to use everything the device had left. Everything. The dragon's roar shattered the air again, and the young man's heart skipped a beat. The creature's massive claw reached out, aiming straight for the glowing barrier. Without thinking, he raised the device higher. His voice trembled as he uttered the ancient words, the ones he had only whispered in his dreams, the ones he had hoped would never be needed. And then it happened. The world around him seemed to explode with light. A force so powerful that it sent a shockwave through the village, knocking him off his feet. For a moment he was weightless. His body seemed to hang in the air, and the world around him blurred into a whirlwind of colors and shapes. When he opened his eyes, he could hardly believe what he saw. The dragon had stopped. The immense creature was frozen in midair, its fiery eyes locked onto his with an expression of shock, as if it had never encountered such power before. The light from the device was so bright now, it seemed to envelop the entire village, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. But it wasn't just the dragon that was frozen. The entire world around him seemed to be suspended in time. The villagers were still huddled together, but their movements had slowed to a crawl, as if they were trapped in a moment that had stretched beyond time itself. And then the young man realized he wasn't just holding the device anymore. It had fused with him. The magic from the device was flowing through his veins, filling him with a strength he had never known. He could feel it deep inside, a burning power that seemed to connect him to the very fabric of reality. His heart raced, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was something else, something raw and primal. He had become part of the magic, and now he had control. The dragon let out a low, guttural growl, snapping him out of his trance. The light from the device surged, and for the first time, the young man realized that he could fight back. But not with violence. No. The battle wasn't one of strength. It was a battle of wills. The young man raised his hand, and the light from the device rippled like water. He felt the dragon's power, its hatred and rage, and he focused on it, drawing it in like a storm. He felt its fiery breath, its deep, untamed energy, but instead of retreating, he pushed forward, absorbing the force. The dragon's eyes flickered with confusion and disbelief as the light from the device intensified. The air grew heavy with the weight of their struggle. The young man could feel the dragon's thoughts, its desperation to break free, to destroy everything in its path. But he held firm. He could feel the weight of the villagers' hopes on his shoulders, and he wouldn't let them fall. His voice rang out, steady and unwavering. "This ends now." The moment the words left his lips, the dragon recoiled, its body jerking as if struck by an invisible force. The young man's heart thundered in his chest, but he pressed forward, pushing the magic to its limits. The dragon roared in agony, its wings flapping wildly, but it couldn't escape. The light from the device was now a blinding pulse, rippling out in every direction, enveloping the creature completely. And then, in a blinding flash of light, the dragon vanished. The young man collapsed to his knees, the energy draining from him in an instant. The villagers were silent. The world around him seemed to come back into focus, the shaking earth now calm. He breathed heavily, his body trembling, as the villagers slowly began to move, their faces full of wonder and disbelief. Had it really happened? The young man glanced at the glowing device, still in his hand. It was dim now, almost lifeless. But something inside him had changed. He had done it. He had saved them. The young man collapsed to his knees, his breath shallow, as the world around him fell eerily silent. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but even through his exhaustion, his mind raced. He had won, yes, but at what cost? The device in his hand now pulsed weakly, its glow flickering like a dying star. The villagers were still, frozen in disbelief, their eyes locked on him, as if waiting for some confirmation that the nightmare had truly ended. His heart hammered in his chest, and for the first time, he realized how much he had feared this exact moment, the moment when he would have to face not just the dragon, but everything that had led him here. He had come to save them, but had he done enough? Was it enough to rebuild their broken lives, or was this just a fleeting victory in a world that had known nothing but pain? The air was heavy with the scent of smoke, and the earth, still thick with the aftermath of the dragon's fury. The faintest breeze stirred the dust, but it felt like a cold whisper, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then slowly the villagers began to move. The first to stir was an old woman, her eyes wide with astonishment. She blinked, as though awakening from a dream. Her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl, and her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. Is it gone?" The young man's voice was hoarse when he answered, as if the effort of speaking was more than he could manage. "It's gone. But even as the words left his lips, the weight of what had happened settled like a stone in his chest. He had done it, yes, but he hadn't done it alone. He had relied on a device, a tool, something far beyond anything he could truly understand. Could it really have been him who defeated the dragon? Or had he simply been a vessel for something far more powerful than he could ever comprehend? A child, no older than 5, stepped forward, her wide eyes filled with hope. She looked up at him as if he were a hero, and for a moment, he wanted nothing more than to believe that he was. That he had truly saved them. But deep down, a gnawing uncertainty clawed at him, reminding him of the cost. The energy that had coursed through him, the connection to the device, it had drained him. And he could feel it. His body was weak, trembling as if the very life force had been siphoned from him. The villagers began to gather around him, their expressions a mix of awe and fear. The young man could feel their gaze like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. They had been desperate, hanging by a thread, and he had come to save them. But who was he now, standing amidst their grateful but wary eyes? What kind of person would he be if he continued to rely on something so foreign, so powerful? As the child approached him, she reached out her small hand. Her touch was gentle, almost innocent. She whispered softly, "Thank you for saving us." Tears threatened to spill from the young man's eyes, but he blinked them away. He smiled at her, though the smile felt hollow. He reached out to touch her hand, but just as his fingers brushed hers, a strange sensation washed over him, a sudden, overwhelming dizziness that made the world tilt. His vision blurred. The air around him felt too heavy to breathe, and he collapsed forward, his body crumbling under the weight of the magic that had consumed him. Before he could stop himself, the young man felt himself falling. His knees buckled, and his vision faded to black. When he awoke, the world was quiet. But it wasn't the same as before. The silence was different, deeper, darker. His surroundings were unfamiliar, and for a moment he panicked. Where was he? What had happened? His body ached all over, as though every part of him had been strained beyond its limits. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs were sluggish, uncooperative. The air smelled different, fresher, almost sweet, like the earth after a rainstorm, but there was something off about it. Slowly, he managed to sit up, blinking as his vision cleared. The village was gone. In its place, there was nothing but an endless expanse of barren land, as if he had been transported to a different place entirely. There was no sign of the villagers, no trace of the dragon, no trace of anything that had been before. A sharp gasp escaped his lips as a terrifying thought pierced his mind. Had he failed? But just as that thought gripped him, he saw something in the distance. A figure. Someone moving toward him. His heart skipped a beat, and he forced himself to stand, though his legs wobbled beneath him. His hand instinctively reached for the device, but it was gone. The magic that had sustained him, the force that had defeated the dragon, it had vanished, leaving him powerless. The figure drew closer, and his heart clenched in his chest. It was a woman, her face obscured by a hood, but her posture regal, commanding. The young man's breath caught in his throat as she stopped before him, her eyes dark and penetrating. "You've made a grave mistake," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried with it a weight that felt like a hammer falling on his chest. His confusion deepened. What are you talking about?" The woman took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "You think you've saved them, but what you've done, what you've unleashed, is much worse than any dragon." The young man's pulse quickened as her words sank in. He had saved the villagers. He had stopped the dragon. What could be worse than that? "You've changed the flow of time," she continued. "You've altered the very fabric of reality." His blood ran cold as the meaning of her words hit him. He had known it wasn't supposed to be this easy. He had known something wasn't right. But now it was too late. "What do you mean? What have I done?" The woman's gaze softened for a brief moment, and the weight of her words grew even heavier. "You've used power beyond your understanding. You didn't just save them. You doomed them." This world, it wasn't meant to be saved. It was meant to fade. His head spun as he tried to process what she was saying.
No.
I couldn't just leave them to die. I couldn't let them. You're too late, she interrupted, her voice almost sorrowful. The world you've tried to save is no longer what it was. What you've changed, it can never be undone. He fell to his knees, the weight of her words crashing over him like a tidal wave. He had thought he was saving them, that he was bringing hope to the hopeless. But now, all he could see was the destruction he had brought. He had fought to protect them, but in the end, he had only hastened their doom. The world around him seemed to twist, the earth shaking beneath him as if it were unraveling at the seams. The young man's heart shattered as the realization hit him. He had not just saved them. He had doomed them all. And now there was no turning back. The young man sank to his knees, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The woman's words echoed in his ears, a cruel reminder of the mistake he had made. He had come to this time, full of hope, full of determination to save them. But now, as the world around him began to unravel, he understood just how naive he had been. His heart ached, not just for the villagers, but for the future they would never have. A future he had shattered, all in the name of salvation. The air around him was thick with the remnants of magic, the world trembling like an ancient tree about to fall. The ground beneath his feet cracked, sending deep fissures through the earth, as though the very foundation of reality was breaking apart. He could hear the wind, but it wasn't a natural breeze. It was the sound of a world in pain, the whisper of time being torn and twisted. The world wasn't just dying. It was being rewritten, forcibly altered by the very hands of the one who sought to save it. The woman stood before him, her expression unreadable, yet there was something in her eyes, something almost human, almost compassionate. She knelt beside him, her presence a quiet comfort amidst the storm. "You can't undo what's been done," she said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos. "But you can still make a choice." The young man looked up at her, tears blurring his vision. His voice cracked as he spoke, a mere whisper. "What choice? What's left?" "I've ruined everything." The woman's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have not ruined everything. But you have to understand, sometimes saving the world means accepting its fate. Not every life is meant to be preserved. Not every timeline is meant to continue. But that doesn't mean you're not worthy of redemption." She stood up, her eyes now scanning the horizon. The land was crumbling, but in the distance, he could see the faintest glimmer of light, a new dawn on the edge of a dying world. It was fragile, like the last spark of a dying flame, but it was there. "Will it be enough?" he asked, almost pleading. "Will they survive? Will the world still have a chance?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she simply watched as the world around them continued to shift, the remnants of magic sparking in the air. Then, she turned back to him, her expression one of quiet resolve. "Only time will tell," she said, "but remember this, young one. The greatest gift you can give is not to fight the inevitable, but to have the courage to let go when the time comes. You did what you could. You gave them hope, even if it was brief. That, in itself, is a victory." As she spoke, the world began to settle. The tremors faded, the air cleared, and slowly, the cracks in the earth healed, closing like the pages of an old book. The magic that had once overwhelmed him now pulsed gently, like the final heartbeat of the world, and he felt something inside him, something he hadn't felt in so long.
Peace.
The young man stood, the weight of his actions still heavy, but a new understanding settling within him. He couldn't change everything. He couldn't undo the mistakes he had made. But he had done his best. And sometimes that was all a person could do. As the woman turned to leave, her figure fading into the distance, the young man looked at the horizon one last time. For the first time, he wasn't sure of what the future held. But that wasn't as important as the truth he had learned, the truth that hope wasn't just about saving others. It was about the courage to face the unknown, the strength to stand up, no matter how broken the world might be. As the woman disappeared from sight, he whispered to the wind, "Thank you." And as the dust settled and the world began to heal, he turned back to the village, now quiet, still, but no longer lost. There was hope again, even if it was fragile, even if it was fleeting. But this time it was enough. If you've been touched by this story, if you've found yourself on the edge of your seat, or if you've felt the weight of every moment, I urge you, subscribe to this channel. This journey, like every story, deserves to be shared. Don't let the magic of this tale fade. Join us and be a part of something that lives on, not just in the stories we tell, but in the lives we touch. Subscribe now, and together, we'll create more memories, more moments, more hope. You don't want to miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for believing.
Subscribe.